The night was quiet, too quiet for the city that never slept. The human man, named Daniel, walked slowly through the narrow alley, his boots pressing against the wet ground. The air smelled of rust, smoke, and rotting food. He was a scavenger, nothing more, always searching for small things to sell, scrap metal, broken parts, or wires that still had life in them. But that night, he heard something different. It was not the hiss of pipes, not the drip of water, not the cry of rats. It was soft, faint, like the breath of someone too weak to call for help. Daniel stopped, his ears straining, his eyes moving in the dark. The sound came again, a weak whimper, then silence. He followed it deeper into the alley where the shadows grew heavier. At the corner, against a wall, he saw a large metal crate. It looked out of place, too new for this forgotten street. Someone had dragged it here and left it behind. The faint sound came again, from inside the crate. Daniel's heart began to beat faster. He bent down, touched the side of the box. Cold metal, damp from the night air. He pressed his ear against it and froze. There was breathing inside, shallow and broken. Without thinking, he pulled at the latch, forcing the old lock with his knife. The door cracked open with a groan, and inside, he saw her. A girl, but not human. Her skin was pale, almost silver in the dim light, with faint glowing lines running across her arms and neck. Her eyes were half open, filled with pain and fear. She was curled up like a broken doll, too weak to move. For a moment, Daniel just stared. He had seen many things in this city, but never this. Who would leave a living being like this, in a box, in the dark alley? The girl tried to speak, her lips trembling, but no sound came out, only a soft gasp. Her thin fingers reached forward, shaking, as if begging him not to leave her. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. This was not his problem, he told himself. He was poor, barely surviving. If he took her with him, it would bring trouble. Someone had left her here for a reason. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe she was sick. But then her eyes met his. In that one look, Daniel saw something he could not ignore. It was not the eyes of a weapon, not the eyes of a monster. It was the eyes of a child who had been discarded, forgotten, and left to die. And deep inside, a voice told him, "If you walk away now, you will never forgive yourself." He reached inside, gently lifting her. Her body was light, far too light, as if she had not eaten for days. She shivered in his arms, her faint glowing lines flickering like a dying candle. Daniel wrapped his old jacket around her and pulled her close. Her head rested weakly against his shoulder. He could feel her fragile breath against his neck. The alley around him was silent again, but the silence felt heavier now. It was as if the city itself was watching, waiting. Daniel glanced around, uneasy. Who had left her here? Would they return to find her gone? He shook off the thought and tightened his grip. Step by step, he carried her out of the alley. The streets were empty at this hour, the neon signs buzzing faintly in the distance. He kept his hood low, his eyes sharp. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed like footsteps following him. But he pushed forward, whispering softly to the girl, though he did not know if she could hear him. "You'll be fine. I'll get you somewhere safe," he murmured. Her fingers twitched, clutching weakly at his shirt. It was the smallest response, but it was enough. Daniel felt a strange warmth inside, a feeling he had not known in years. For the first time in a long time, he was not walking alone. When he reached his shelter, a small broken room at the edge of the market, he laid her careful. On the old mattress, the girl stirred, her glowing lines faint but steady. Daniel sat beside her, unsure of what he had just done. He should have left her, he knew. But looking at her now, fragile and still breathing, he felt something stronger than fear. She was not trash, not something to throw away. She was alive, and she was in his care now. As the night deepened, Daniel stayed awake, listening to her shallow breaths. The silence of the alley had followed him here, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like the start of something he could not yet understand. And in that moment, one truth became clear. He had found her discarded and forgotten, but he had chosen to save her life, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light slipped weakly through the cracks in Daniel's shelter. Dust floated in the air, glowing faintly as the sun touched the broken walls. Daniel sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the fragile figure lying on the old mattress. The alien girl had not moved much through the night. Her faint glowing lines flickered now and then, like sparks struggling to stay alive. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. He had not slept, not even for a moment. Every sound outside made him jump. Every shadow near the door made him fear someone had come looking for her. But the hours passed quietly, and still she remained. She was alive, but barely. Her lips moved, whispering something he could not hear. He leaned closer, his ear almost against her face. "Water," she breathed, the word broken, the sound weak. Daniel scrambled up, grabbed his tin cup, and poured the last of his stored water into it. He lifted her head gently and pressed the cup to her lips. The girl sipped slowly, coughing once, but the water slid down her throat. Her glowing lines brightened just a little. Daniel let out a shaky breath. Something so small, just water, had given her strength. He wondered how long she had been trapped in that crate without food, without anyone caring. The thought made his chest tighten with anger. So, Mion had thrown her away like garbage, but she was no garbage. When she opened her eyes again, he saw more clearly. They were a strange color, not human at all. Deep violet, with a soft glow inside them. For a second, Daniel forgot to breathe. Her eyes were beautiful, but full of fear. She flinched, as if expecting him to strike her. Daniel raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "It's okay," he said in a calm voice. "I won't hurt you." She blinked, confused, her lips parting. "You not send me back?" she asked in a broken accent. Her words were slow, shaky, but clear enough for him to understand. "Send you back? No." Daniel shook his head. "I don't even know where you came from." The girl looked down, her fingers curling weakly into the blanket. "Discarded," she whispered, the word sharp with pain. Her glowing marks dimmed again, as if the memory itself stole her strength. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to ask more, but he could see her trembling. Pushing her now would only break her further. Instead, he stood and moved to the corner. He pulled out an old tin plate, scraping together what food he had. Hard bread, dried beans, a small piece of fruit. It was not much, barely enough for himself. But when he placed the plate near her, she stared at it as though it was treasure. "Eat," he urged softly. Her thin hands shook as she reached, breaking the bread into small pieces. She ate carefully, slowly, like someone afraid the food would vanish. Daniel watched her, his chest heavy. He had lived poor all his life, but at least he had not been locked in a crate to die. This girl had known worse than hunger, worse than loneliness. When she finished, her breathing steadied, her glowing marks pulsed faintly brighter. Daniel asked gently, "What's your name?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. Finally she whispered, "Lyra." The name sounded soft, like a broken song, but it fit her. Daniel repeated it under his breath. "Lyra." And for the first time, her eyes lifted to meet his without fear. The silence between them was heavy but not empty anymore. It was full of questions, full of things unspoken. Daniel knew he should not get attached. He was just a scavenger, hiding in a broken shelter. He could barely keep himself alive. But when Lyra's eyes stayed on him, full of quiet hope, something inside him shifted. As the day passed, Lyra tried to sit up. Her body was weak, shaking with every movement. Daniel rushed to help, supporting her back with his arm. She leaned against him, breathing hard but determined. "Don't push yourself," he said, but she only shook her head slowly. "I must live," she whispered, her voice like wind. The words struck him deep. She was fighting, even when the world had already thrown her away. Outside, Daniel heard voices in the market, people shouting, traders bargaining, guards passing by. He stiffened, afraid they might come searching. He closed the door tight, heart pounding. If anyone found Lyra here, if they knew he had her, things could turn dangerous. But when he looked back at her, resting against his shoulder, he knew one thing: he could not let her go. Night began to fall again. Daniel sat beside Lyra, giving her his blanket to keep her warm. The world outside was harsh, but inside this broken room, a fragile bond was forming, a human who had nothing, and an alien girl who had been left with less than nothing. Together, they were clinging to life on the edge, and Daniel felt, deep in his bones, that saving her was no mistake. It was the only choice he could live with. The night had returned, and with it came whispers in the streets. Daniel moved quietly, slipping through the market's back lanes, his hood pulled low. He needed food, medicine, anything to keep Lyra alive. But every step outside felt heavier than before. He could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching him. The traders spoke in hushed voices. As he passed, words carried through the air. Defective, escaped, worthless experiment. Daniel slowed, pretending to check a broken piece of metal on the ground. He listened, his heart thudding. They were talking about Lyra, though they never said her name. Rumors spread fast in this city, and rumors always carried hunters behind them. Back at the shelter, Lyra sat against the wall, wrapped in the thin blanket Daniel had given her. Her glowing lines pulsed softly, brighter than yesterday, but still weak. She tilted her head when he entered, her violet eyes full of quiet relief. "You came back," she whispered. Daniel forced a small smile, setting down the bread and a small pouch of herbs he had managed to buy. "Of course I came back," he said, hiding his worry. But the weight in his chest only grew heavier. When Lyra ate, Daniel crouched beside her, his voice low. "People are talking, Lyra," he murmured. "They're looking for someone like you." Her hands froze, a piece of bread slipping from her fingers. Her eyes widened in fear, her glowing lines dimming instantly. "They know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not yet," Daniel said quickly. "But soon they might, and if they do—" He stopped himself, unwilling to say the rest. Lyra lowered her head, whispering, "Hunters, always come for me." Her words chilled Daniel more than the night air. "Why?" he asked softly. She hugged herself tightly, her voice breaking. "Because I was made, but not made right. They say I am broken. I was thrown away. But if I live, it shames them. They must erase me." Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling in his veins. To discard her was cruel enough, but to hunt her down, to erase her, it was evil. Hours later, as the city lights dimmed, Daniel heard it, the crunch of boots outside his shelter. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Lyra to stay silent. Her glowing lines flickered nervously. As she held her breath, through the cracks in the wooden door, Daniel saw shadows moving. Two men, tall and silent, scanning the street with devices that gave off a faint hum. Hunters. His chest tightened. They paused near his door, one of them whispering, "She's close. The signal is weak but steady." Daniel's blood ran cold. He pressed his back against the wall, pulling Lyra gently into the darkest corner. Her small hand gripped his arm, trembling. Her eyes begged him not to let them take her. The hunters lingered, one tapping the scanner. "It could be interference. Check the next street," the other muttered. Finally, they moved away, their footsteps fading slowly into the distance. Daniel let out a breath he had been holding too long. Lyra collapsed against him, shaking violently. "They will come back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They always come back." Daniel pulled her close, his voice firm. "Then let them. I won't let them take you." She looked up at him, her violet eyes shimmering with tears. "No one ever says that," she murmured. "No one ever stayed before." The words struck Daniel like a blade. How many times had she been left, betrayed, abandoned? The rest of the night was restless. Daniel stayed awake, his knife in hand, listening for every sound. Lyra slept fitfully, her head resting against his arm. Her glowing lines pulsed faintly, as if responding to his steady heartbeat. In the silence, Daniel realized something. She was no longer just a stranger he had pulled from a crate. She was under his protection now, and the hunters would have to go through him to reach her. By dawn, the market buzzed with new rumors. Some claimed the discarded one was still alive. Others whispered that anyone hiding her would be punished. Daniel knew the net was tightening. He had lived his life hiding from trouble, avoiding risk, keeping to the edges. But now he was in the center of it. And strangely, he did not regret it. Back in the shelter, Lyra stirred awake, her voice faint but steady. "Daniel, why you help me?" she asked, her eye searching his face. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you deserve to live," he said simply. Her lips trembled, her glowing lines warmed, and for the first time, a tiny smile touched her face, fragile but real. The hunters were close, closer than ever. But so was something stronger, a bond forming in the shadows between a man who had nothing and a girl who had been discarded. The city would hunt them, the hunters would not stop. But Daniel had made his choice. She was not forgotten anymore. She was his to protect, and he would not fail her. The city outside never rested, but inside Daniel's shelter, time slowed. The walls were cracked. The air smelled of damp stone and metal, yet within that broken place, a fragile peace had begun to grow. Daniel sat on the floor, sharpening a small blade with a piece of stone. Across from him, Lyra sat wrapped in his blanket, her violet eyes half closed as she tried to stay awake. Her glowing lines pulsed faintly in the dark. Daniel had noticed something strange. Whenever she grew afraid, the light dimmed until it almost vanished. But when she looked at him, when he spoke softly, the light grew brighter. It was as if her body itself responded to comfort. That night, a cold wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Daniel shifted closer, offering her the last bit of fire he had built in an old can. Lyra rubbed her hands together, whispering, "Warm, safe." Daniel tilted his head, surprised by her choice of words. "You feel safe here?" he asked. She nodded weakly, her eyes lifting to his face. "You, not like others, not throw me away," she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. It was simple, almost childlike, but the weight of those words was heavy. He had never been called safe before, never thought of himself as anything more than a scavenger surviving one day at a time. Yet to her, he was something different, and that thought shook him. Lyra tried to sit up straighter, but her body trembled. Daniel reached out quickly, steadying her by the shoulder. Her skin was cool, softer than he expected, the glowing lines warm under his hand. "Don't push yourself," he said gently. "You need time." Lyra met his gaze, her lips trembling. "If I slow, hunters win," she murmured. Daniel shook his head firmly. "They don't win as long as I'm here." The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the fire crackling. Lyra stared at him as though weighing his words. Finally, she whispered, "Why you risk?" Daniel hesitated, the truth not easy to explain. He thought of his past, years of scavenging, of hiding from gangs and guards, of walking past suffering because it wasn't his fight. He had always kept his head down, choosing survival over conscience. But something had changed the night he opened that crate. "Because you don't deserve what they did," he said simply. "You're alive, and that matters." Lyra blinked slowly, her eyes shining with something unspoken. Her small hand moved, hesitant, resting lightly on his arm. The glowing lines along her wrist flared brighter, warm against his skin. Daniel froze, startled, but did not pull away. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "When you near, light comes back," she whispered. Daniel's heart stumbled. He had no answer for that, only silence. As the night deepened, Daniel spread the blanket wider and shifted so Lyra could lean against him. She resisted at first, shy, uncertain, but the cold air was sharp, and her body was weak. Finally, she rested her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. Her glowing lines steadied, glowing gently in rhythm with her breathing. Daniel stayed still, not wanting to disturb her. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Outside, the wind carried distant voices. Hunters still searching. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he forced his eyes to stay on Lyra. He knew danger was near, but in this small moment she was safe, and he would fight to keep it that way. Hours passed in silence. Daniel almost drifted into sleep when Lyra stirred. Her voice was faint, her words halting. "Daniel, if hunters catch, will you let me go?" His eyes snapped open, and he turned to look at her. "No," he said firmly, his voice like stone. "I won't let them touch you." Lyra's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Then, I can sleep, she whispered. And she did, her breathing steady against his side. Daniel watched her, the soft glow of her lines lighting the darkness. He realized something then, something dangerous but true. He was no longer protecting her just because it was right. He was protecting her because she had become his responsibility, his bond, his fragile piece of family in a world that had given him nothing. When dawn came, the first rays of light crept into the shelter. Daniel still sat awake, Lyra still resting against him. The hunters would return, the danger would not stop. But something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer just a scavenger hiding in the dark. He was a guardian, and Lyra was no longer discarded. She was his bond in the darkness, and he would not let it break. The day stretched long and heavy. Daniel spent it fixing small pieces of scrap into tools he could trade, but his mind was not on the work. Every clang of metal, every distant shout in the market outside, only made his thoughts circle back to Lyra. She was sitting nearby, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the glowing lines on her skin as if they were scars she could not wash away. Daniel finally set the tools aside. Lyra, he said softly, you need to tell me the truth. Why are they hunting you? Her violet eyes lifted slowly, hesitant, almost afraid of the question. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, If I tell, you send me away. Daniel shook his head, leaning closer. I won't send ye away, he said firmly. Her lips trembled as she studied his face, searching for lies, but she only found determination, and so she began, her voice broken and quiet. I was created, she whispered. Not born like you, not like others. My kind build children in glass chambers, designed to be perfect, beautiful, strong. We are not given childhood, not given choice. We are made as gifts, for power, for trade, sometimes for ownership. Her voice faltered, her hands curling tight into the blanket. Daniel's chest grew heavy. He had heard whispers about alien experiments, but to hear it spoken so softly, so painfully, shook him. Lyra's glowing lines dimmed as she continued. But me, I was not perfect. When I was made, my light was weak, my body small, my voice broken. They said I was failure. They put me aside, like broken glass, and when no one claimed me, they discarded me. Her words hung in the air like a blade. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw tight. How could they do that? He muttered. Lyra shook her head slowly. To them, I am mistake. A mistake must not live. If I live, it shames their idea of perfection. Tears welled in her glowing eyes, falling silently onto her hands. Daniel moved closer, gently pulling the blanket tighter around her. You're not a mistake, he said, his voice low but fierce. You're alive, and that is enough. Lyra blinked up at him as if his words were something she had never heard before. Her breath trembled, her glowing lines flickered weakly. No one ever said that, she whispered, her hands lifted slowly, clutching at his sleeve. You really believe? Daniel placed his hand gently over hers. I don't just believe, I know. They can call you whatever they want. But to me, you're not broken. You're Lyra. The name hung softly between them, carrying more weight than he realized. For the first time, she let herself cry without holding back. Silent tears, her face buried against his chest. Daniel held her carefully, his arms strong around her fragile frame. His heart burned with anger for what had been done to her, but stronger than the anger was something else. A vow forming in his soul. They would not take her. They would not erase her. She was his now, and he would protect her. When the tears finally slowed, Lyra leaned back, her eyes red but steady. Daniel, if they find me, they kill you too, she warned. Her voice was soft but serious. Daniel gave a small, grim smile. Then I guess they'll have to try, because I'm not letting you go. For a long time, Lyra only stared at him. Then she whispered, Family? The word came awkwardly, uncertain. Daniel froze, his chest tightening. He had never heard that word spoken to him in years. Not since he had lost everything. Slowly, he nodded. Yes. Family. Lyra's eyes widened, her glowing lines pulsing brighter than he had ever seen. She clung to him, her fragile body shaking but her voice full of new strength. Then I fight too, she whispered. You saved me. I will not let them take you. The bond was no longer fragile, no longer only in silence. It was spoken, sealed with words. She was no longer discarded, no longer forgotten. She was family now, and family was worth everything. That night, Daniel sat awake again, but the fear inside him had shifted. He no longer feared the hunters for himself, he feared them only for her. But now, as Lyra slept close, her glowing lines warm and steady, he knew something with absolute clarity. The truth had been revealed. She was not broken, not to him. She was his reason to fight. And nothing, no hunter, no shadow, would take that away. The night was heavy with silence. Daniel sat by the door of his shelter, gripping the handle of his knife. The air smelled of rain and smoke, the city lights flickering faintly in the distance. Lyra slept behind him, curled in the blanket, her glowing lines pulsing in slow rhythm. But Daniel knew peace could not last. The hunters had not given up, and tonight the city felt too quiet, as if waiting. The first sign came with the low hum of engines. Daniel's head snapped up, his heart tightening. Through the cracks of the wall he saw dark vehicles moving slowly through the streets, their lights off, their engines soft, built for hunting, not for show. Figures moved in the shadows, tall men with scanners glowing faint blue. They were sweeping the district, street by street. And Daniel knew they would not stop until they reached him. He rushed back to Lyra, shaking her gently. Her violet eyes opened, confused, then sharp with fear as she saw his face. "They're here," he whispered. She sat up, her glowing lines dimming, her small hands clenching the blanket. "They found me," she breathed. Daniel crouched, steadying her shoulders. "They haven't yet, but they will if we stay. We have to move." Lyra's voice trembled. "Where can we go?" Daniel looked at the broken walls around them, the leaking roof. There was no safe place in this city, no corner the hunters could not reach. But still, he said, "Anywhere but here, come on." He pulled her to her feet, her body weak but determined. Together they slipped into the night, moving through narrow alleys. Daniel kept low, every sense sharp. The sound of boots echoed in the distance, scanners buzzing faintly. Once, a beam of blue light swept past them, barely missing where they hid behind a pile of broken crates. Lyra's breath came fast, her glowing lines fainting until they were almost gone. Daniel squeezed her hand, whispering, "Stay with me." They moved again, deeper into the forgotten parts of the city. Rusting pipes dripped above them, rats scattered at their steps. The hunters' voices grew closer. "She's here somewhere, the signal's rising." Daniel's stomach twisted. He pulled Lyra into an old drainage tunnel, the air damp and foul. Water dripped down the walls, echoing around them. Lyra clung to his arm, whispering, "Daniel, they will not stop." "I know," he muttered, his grip on the knife tightening. The tunnel split into two paths. Daniel dragged her down the darker one, hoping to throw off the hunters, but the sound of boots followed, louder, closer. He glanced back, seeing shadows moving fast. "They're on us," he hissed. Lyra stumbled, falling against him. Her body was trembling, her light fading almost completely. "Go," she whispered, her voice desperate. "Leave me, they only want me." Daniel spun, grabbing her face gently but firmly. "Don't ever say that. I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." The footsteps thundered closer. Daniel pulled her behind a broken grate, crouching low. The hunters' lights swept past, blue beams crawling across the wet walls. "Signal strong. She's right here," one of them said. Daniel's pulse raced, his hand tightening on the knife. He knew they couldn't run forever. They would have to fight. When the hunters drew nearer, Daniel sprang from the shadows. His knife flashed, slashing at the first man's arm. The hunter cursed, stumbling back. The second raised his weapon, but Daniel kicked hard, knocking it away. For a brief moment, chaos filled the tunnel. Lyra cried out, her glowing lines flaring suddenly bright. The light blinded the hunters, forcing them back. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the tunnel. "Now run," he shouted. They ran together, the tunnel shaking with echoes of pursuit. Shots rang out, sparks flying from the walls. Daniel shielded Lyra with his body, pushing her ahead. Her glowing lines surged, casting light so strong it filled the dark tunnel. It was no longer faint, no longer weak. Her whole body glowed like fire. The hunters shouted, stumbling. "What is this? She wasn't supposed to—" A shockwave burst from Lyra, a pulse of pure light that rippled down the tunnel. The hunters were thrown back, their weapons clattering into the water. Daniel stopped, holding his eyes from the glare. When it faded, Lyra collapsed into his arms, trembling but alive. Her voice was faint but steady. "I saved you," she whispered. Daniel's chest heaved, his heart pounding. He held her close, whispering fiercely, "No, Lyra, we saved each other." The tunnel fell silent again, only the drip of water echoing. The hunters lay scattered, groaning but beaten for now. Daniel cradled Lyra against his chest, her glow soft but steady. She had more strength inside her than she ever believed, and together they had survived the hunt. But Daniel knew this was not the end. The hunters would return, stronger, more prepared. Yet as he looked down at Lyra, her violet eyes half closed but shining with trust, he felt no fear. The bond between them had already chosen his path. No matter how many hunts came, no matter how strong the enemy, he would stand, because she was worth it, and because family was something you never abandoned. The rain had ended by dawn. Pale light slipped through the ruined roofs above the drainage tunnels. Daniel sat against the wall, his arm wrapped around Lyra's small frame. She was weak, her glow faint again after the burst of light that had saved them. But she was alive, breathing softly against his chest. The hunters had been beaten back, at least for now. Their vehicles had pulled away during the night, leaving silence in the streets. But Daniel knew they would come again. Not today, not tonight, but soon. Men like that never stopped until they had what they wanted. He should have felt afraid, but strangely, he didn't. Lyra stirred, her violet eyes opening slowly. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Daniel, you didn't leave me." Daniel let out a tired laugh, shaking his head. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Her glowing lines pulsed faintly, as if answering his words. She sat up carefully, her body trembling but her eyes clearer than before. "I was made to be nothing," she said slowly. "But with you, I feel like something." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, are not something, Lyra. You're someone, and you matter." Her lips trembled, and tears welled in her eyes. "Then, what am I to you?" she asked, her voice fragile. Daniel hesitated, his chest heavy. He had never thought about family in years, never thought he would have anyone to protect or care for, but the answer came without struggle. "You're mine," he said softly, "my family." The word hung between them, filling the silence with warmth. Lyra's small hands reached for his, clutching them tightly. Her glowing lines brightened, steady now, no longer flickering. She whispered the word as if testing it, "family." And for the first time since he found her, she smiled, a real smile, fragile but beautiful. Daniel's heart ached, but it was a good ache. He had lived years believing life was only about survival. Now he realized survival had no meaning without someone to share it with. Lyra gave his broken world purpose, and he had given her something no one else ever had: choice, care, and belonging. The hours passed, and together they planned. Daniel spoke of leaving the city, of finding a place far away from hunters and cruel masters. Lyra listened, her eyes wide with hope. "Beyond the walls," she whispered, "where sky is clean." Daniel nodded. "Yes, beyond the walls." She squeezed his hand. "Then I will follow." As night fell again, the city's noises faded to distant echoes. Daniel built a small fire in a tin can, the glow dancing across the walls. Lyra sat beside him, wrapped in his coat, This time, instead of the blanket, she looked stronger, though still fragile. Her head rested lightly on his shoulder, her voice steady. "When you found me, I thought I would die," she said. "You gave me water, food, safety, and now family." Daniel swallowed hard, staring into the flames. He had not done much, not in his own eyes. He had only done what any man should have, but to it had meant everything. "You gave me life too, Lyra," he said quietly. "Before you, I was only breathing, not living. Now, I feel alive." Silence stretched, but it was no longer heavy. It was gentle, like a blanket around them both. Outside, the hunters would gather again. Beyond the walls, dangers waited. But inside that broken shelter, hope was alive. It glowed brighter than Lyra's lines, brighter than any neon sign in the city. Lyra lifted her face, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "Daniel," she whispered, "do you promise? Promise never to throw me away?" Daniel turned, meeting her gaze. "I promise, Lyra," he said, his voice steady and sure. "From now on, no one discards you. No one forgets you. You're mine, and I'm yours. That's what family means." She let out a soft sound, half sob, half laugh. Her arms wrapped weakly around him, holding as tight as she could. Her glowing lines shone bright and steady, filling the small room with warmth. Daniel closed his eyes, resting his chin on her hair. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The city outside remained cruel. The hunters remained near. But in that broken corner of the world, something stronger had taken root. Not fear, not weakness, but love and belonging. Lyra was no longer discarded. Daniel was no longer alone. And together, they were more than survivors. They were a family. A new family, born in the darkest alley, shining brighter than the hunters could ever chase. And that bond, Daniel knew, would never be broken.